1 Corinthians 13:5. Love is not provoked. This is the second little 5-minute thought that I have given on this theme because it needs to be touched on. Some people will point to Jesus' cleansing of the temple and say that Jesus lost control. He did it twice, at the beginning of his ministry and at the end of his ministry. Let's examine something. First, let's go to the book of Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 15. Okay, it says, "For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weakness, but one who is in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin." Okay, so this verse tells us that Jesus did not sin. So whatever happened in the temple, the 2 occasions that he cleansed the temple, was not sinful. Okay, but we also have Paul saying that love is not provoked. So we have to rectify these things. Let's take a look at another verse. And this is in Ephesians, if we want to turn to Ephesians. And this was written by Paul. Ephesians 4, chapter 26. 4, verse 26. Okay, and here it says, "Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your wrath, nor give place to the devil." The sun going down upon our wrath is a reference to holding a resentment. It is one thing to get angry. It is another thing to hang on to that anger and let it become a resentment. But in the first part of this verse, it says, "Be angry and sin not." So Paul indicates that there is some type of anger that we can feel that does not pass the threshold or cross the line into sinfulness. And what could that be? Well, in 1 Corinthians 13:5, it says, "Love is not provoked." Okay, so if we are angry, it is if we are angry and not sinning, it is an anger that is not provoked. It doesn't cross some line. Okay, now in the account in the Gospel of John, it says that Jesus took a whip and drove them out of the temple. But we need to look at one thing. It does not say he struck anybody with the whip. And most theologians believe that he did not strike anybody. Had he struck somebody, that would have been recorded because that would have been significant. Having a whip and cracking a whip is a sign of authority. And he was demonstrating his authority, that he made the rules for the temple. It was as if somebody broke into your house, your personal house, and you have the authority to drive them out. That was the position of Jesus in the temple. But he did not cross that line into sinfulness. When we talk about verbal abuse, oftentimes there are 4 characteristics of verbal abuse, or things that are tied to verbal abuse. One is name calling. If we are verbally abusing somebody, we are calling them names, okay? Another is cruel insults, like a mother or a father that is verbally abusing their children might say, "You're good for nothing. Nobody will ever love you. I wish you were never born." Cruel insults like that. That crosses that threshold into verbal abuse. And humiliating somebody, especially in public, is a type of abuse. And threatening somebody with some future harm is a type of verbal abuse. Now, name-calling itself, we know, like John the Baptist called the Pharisees a brood of vipers. And so name-calling itself, there has to be some type of cruel connection to it, like calling a woman a whore, for example, where there's some type of cruel connection, or calling a boy, not real politically correct today, but a lot of times they would call a boy a faggot, a gay person, and it was a way to insult his manlyhood. That type of name calling crosses into into verbal abuse. But for example, if the person was caught lying, and they're called a liar, that's not necessarily verbal abuse. But one thing that we are shown in this cleansing of the temple is that sometimes people can get loud and they can get angry and yet be in full control and not lose control. So they have not, quote unquote, lost their temper, but they're still in full control. And that's what we saw with Jesus in the temple, is Jesus was still in full control. And he did not cross the line. He did not commit sin. We can be angry and not sin. But it is much better from a psychological perspective to be able to avoid anger altogether.